And sometimes that ED2 addition comes in at the last minute. I know a lot of counselors that hear from students and they're like, you know what, I really want to apply this place ED2. And you're like, okay, but we haven't really prepared for that.
Yeah.
And it shows in that application, right? And so a lot of times you feel the disconnect in those applications and they don't read as strongly, right? And if I have such a strong ED1 pool, these are students who want to be here, they're great. I'm going to take as many as I can, just like we said, right?
Christina, hi there.
Hello.
This is going to show that I'm nerdy and in the weeds, but this question that we're answering today, and friends, we're doing a series of answering the most frequently asked questions that we get as admission officers and college counselors. And so today we're talking about, is ED1 and ED2, are they the same? Are they different? I love asking people this question so that, I'm like a nerd geek, right? I like to ask admission officers this question. So what say you? Tell me your answer, if they're different, how they're different. Take it away, and then I'll have some follow-ups based on what other people have told me and see if it resonates with your experience.
Okay. So having worked at a school, this NYU, started ED2 while I was there. And we went back and forth quite a bit on whether we would do ED2 at Barnard. And it's interesting from an enrollment perspective. So I like to think of the students, they got one chip to play, right? And in ED1, they have to play this chip well, right? Because there are some schools that do not have ED2, where if you want to apply ED, you have to apply ED1, right? And so of those schools that do not have an ED2, like a Barnard.
Have ED2, Northwestern Duke, they don't have ED2. Or Williams and Amherst.
Correct, right? But some of the Ivies have EA and not ED, like single choice EA, because they're like or whatever. But fine. Basically the same thing. You have to play that chip at that time. So you have to choose wisely. Because if you want, another school that is highly competitive and you play that chip for a really big reach school and that isn't likely, you've wasted that chip because now you're in the regular decision pool for a highly selective school and it's tough, right? So ED2 from an enrollment perspective is a way for schools to say, like, we know that we aren't of the caliber of school that students may play that chip for us first. But when they don't get into their first choice, then we become their second. And here they are. And we love that, right? So most schools, it's not an issue of I applied ED2, I didn't apply ED1, and they're going to look at me differently. No, they're excited you're there regardless, right? They've positioned themselves to be in a space where they can be that number 2 choice and find students that want to be considered in a smaller pool. So yes, there is a difference because it's you have to be strategic in how you're going to play it, right? Like if you're applying to a school that has ED2, you're great, right? But if there's a school that does not have ED2, you have to figure out how you're going to play this one chip strategically. And if you use it on a school where it's probably not, it's such a high reach, it's a waste, right? So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I don't know.
You should have probably asked it this way. Almost every college has a lower ED2 admit rate than an ED1 admit rate. Now, they don't publish their ED2 admit rates, and there's very, very few do publish it. Very few. And Hillary's done a great job on our podcast explaining to students that by the time, let's say it's an information session, by the time I go over all the reasons why the ED2 admit rate is lower than the ED1 admit rate, like I'm really getting too much into the weeds, and in an information session, to spend 10 minutes on that is just probably not the best use of our time. But I'll tell you some of the reasons that I've heard, and I want your thoughts. And I would also agree with these reasons. So one is in ED1, you need every type of kid because it's a blank slate and you need every type of kid. So let's say, and you would definitely relate to this, especially having worked 2 New York schools. I think it would be fair to say that when it comes to your ED pool, states like New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, several others that basically within a 200-mile radius, probably Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania, they are not underrepresented. And so if you see a ton of kids that come in from those locations and you're like, I'll quote Lee Coffin from Dartmouth, the way he likes to explain it, ED is in ED, we ask ourselves, why not? We have a perfectly fine kid here who's enthusiastic and wants to commit. But in regular, we say, why? Why should I take you over these other 10 amazing kids? Right? So
That's super accurate.
right? Yeah. So
Yes.
if
Yes.
you're a school that gets a lot of ED1 applicants, you are already to some extent in ED2 asking the question, who is not in our student body that we want here? And so if you're
Yeah.
coming from an overrepresented demographic, and I used an example of location, but I could have used many other examples, like you're now, the ED2 pool is now competitive because I did extremely well in ED1 in your bucket. So that's one reason why ED2 is tougher. Would you agree with that? Because that's something that I consistently heard, and I would say I've experienced it as a counselor as well, definitely. In fact, I'll even tell you a story. I'll tell you a story. I was working with a kid from New Jersey, and this kid was very strong, by the way. And the kid applied to WashU in St. Louis, ED2, and was deferred. And the kid was coming from a very good private school. And the WashU admission officer told the private school counselor we would have grabbed her in ED1. We would have snagged her and we would have taken her because you need every type of kid. But then if we did extremely well, let's say we took a bunch of kids from your school. This gets into something else, which we'll talk about in another video, whether there's a quota. There's not a quota, but you don't want to take too many kids from one school when you want to keep other feeders happy, right? So let's say they say, well, we already took 4 kids from your school in ED1, and we want to keep our other counselors happy, not only just in the privates, but in the publics, and not just in your state, but around the whole country. So that's one reason why I consistently hear that ED2 is tougher, because we don't need every type of kid now. Like there's some people that we're trying to already start thinking about, okay, where may we be soft in our applicant pool and micro-targeting? And then the other reason why I hear is because the same thing you talked about, how some people overreach and need ED1. They go for what some people call a long shot or unlikely or a far reach or whatever term you want to use.
A Hail Mary.
A Hail Mary, that's probably a better word because some of them are way out there and you know
Yeah.
that. Well, guess what? Some people don't get the message that they need to recalibrate in ED2, and they just think that maybe like that group of counselors didn't appreciate my excellence, and they don't necessarily adjust down. Now, there was one year where Emory did share their difference in their data, and it was 38% to 9. It was their ED1 admit rate versus their ED2. And this is one thing they said was that some of those kids in the ED2 pool, they had no business being in applying ED. Because some people just hear ED is a softer admit, and then they think that their 2.9 and their 990 is going to get bailed out by ED2. And so those are a couple of the reasons that I consistently hear that schools have a lower acceptance rate in ED2 versus ED1. So put that through your professional filter, Christina. Does that resonate as truth to you?
So when I was at NYU and we were reading ED2,
Yeah.
one of the things that I did notice is that the pool was definitely a little bit weaker than ED1.
Yeah.
And so that is definitely true. And I think part of that is, yes, it's the fallback piece of it, but your ED1 kids are your most excited kids. They're the people who have, for the most part, really put a lot into the thought into the application. This is the school that their number one choice. They really want to be here, right? Your ED2 pool, and sometimes it's just because of the timing too, especially if you're kind of like waiting until you hear back from ED1 to start working on your ED2 application. But
some people might not be following this. So if you apply ED1, you're typically going to be hearing around mid-December. And then you got a deadline that might literally be January 1st for ED2. So now you're going into Christmas.
Yes.
You might feel punched in the gut. You never got in. You're in Christmas. You're in holiday mode. So then some people are kind of scrambling and not putting together the best application for ED2. And that's what Christina's talking about the timing.
Yes. And sometimes that ED2 addition comes in at the last minute. I know a lot of counselors that hear from students and they're like, you know what? I really want to apply this place ED2. And you're like, okay, but we haven't really prepared for that.
Yeah.
And it shows in that application, right? And so a lot of times you feel the disconnect in those
Hmm.
applications and they don't read as strongly, right?
Hmm.
And if I have such a strong ED1 pool, these are students who
Right.
want to be here, they're great. I'm going to take as many as I can, just like we said, right? And then this pool, I'm like, well, let's see what we get in regular.
Hmm.
I don't ask that question as often in ED1 because I'm like, they're here and it's binding. So, and they want to be here. So let's take what we have. But come ED2, you're like, I don't know. So maybe I'm going to defer them. Where I'm just
Sure.
like, I'm not quite sure. I'm deferred into regular, come back and see what else I'm going to get. But that question comes in more. And also your ED2 pool typically is also smaller than your ED1 pool as
Yes.
well.
You pull the ED1.
Correct. So, you can think about it and from an enrollment management standpoint, like I need to take some from every pool, but I'm going to take less and less as I go if my strongest pool comes first, right?
Mhm.
So with ED2, now I'm like, well, I have less spaces and I'm more thoughtful about those spaces. And so I'm going to ask more questions, hence Lee's question of, well, why this student? Why not wait to see what else we get, So from an enrollment standpoint, in terms of like how we're looking at it, it does change the dynamics for sure. At the same time, I think the reason that schools have put in ED2 is as a catch-all for those students realizing that, hey, we might have been your first choice here, but now we are now. So I think sometimes the idea doesn't necessarily materialize always in the apps, but sometimes we get some great kids out of ED2, but it's always a gamble. Like the reason why we never did it at Barnard and we tossed it around a lot was because the perception was that it would just make your ED2 apps grow, right? Like if you're adding ED2, you're going to have more early decision apps overall. And that's not necessarily true. It kind of splits them because the people who were going to play that chip for you in the beginning, now they're like, oh, well, I can wait, right? So if my peers are all, Ivies, then they're going to go for that instead of playing it for my institution
Was
and
there
wait.
any consideration at all of Columbia doesn't have it? I know Barnard functions separately, but you're like because I don't know if you know this, Christina, but Barnard's the only seven sister that didn't have ED2. All the others do. It's
Mhm.
only Barnard
Mhm.
that didn't. Most highly selective, most like Swarthmore, Pomona, you know what I mean? Rice, WashU, like it's very few. Well, there's actually, I should explain this. There's two types of schools that don't have ED2. That one
But
are the uber selective schools that feel like we don't need to have another round to lock people in. We have enough people that are going to pick us as the first choice school. Northwestern, Duke, Ivies, Barnard, schools like that. Very small, Williams Amherst. The other, and they would never tell you this, but we're going to keep it real here. The other are a group of schools that they just won't get enough applicants if they have ED2 to even justify having a second round. You don't want to create a whole separate round, which creates its own logistical challenges to turn around and get like 9 applications. It's just not even worth it. So that's a true, I'm not
mhm.
going to name names there, but that's true because if you look at the numbers, there's approximately 210 schools that have ED, and it's approximately half that have ED2. In most cases, it's because they just wouldn't get, they would love to have people that they would lock in, but to do it, to have another round to get like 11 apps or 7 apps, like why do it logistically?
It's not worth it. I mean, the reason, yes, Barnard tends to follow Columbia's lead on a lot of things just because we are so connected in that way. Yes. However, the main reason why we never did it was because our ED pool was sometimes twice as much as like a Pomona and a Wellesley or whatever. We didn't need it. We would get like 1,200 apps in early
Yeah,
decision, which
yeah.
is a lot
No,
for a small
it
liberal arts
is.
college.
It is, because I saw some pretty strong kids not get in Barnard ED1. Like, I knew the bar was pretty high. That's a whole
Hmm.
other thing. Talk about another time.
Hmm.
Like, ED does not automatically guarantee it's super competitive schools. You still need to be very strong, you know? Last question
100%.
for you.
Yes.
You know how you were differentiating sometimes that ED app is just a weaker application, you know?
Mhm.
How much of
Mhm.
that do you think, and I'm asking you a question that I honestly don't know, so I really want your opinion. how much of that was the student's lack of enthusiasm for the school, or it's just overall a weaker applicant? Like if you took that ED1 kid who's totally got their act together, they were going to do a really good ED2 app. You know what I mean? In other words, how much is it reflection of the caliber of the student versus the lack of enthusiasm for the second ED2 school? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's sometimes it's both.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the student who is over calibrating their competitiveness for the
Yes.
school
Sure.
and overreaching, right?
Yes.
But then sometimes it is the fact that they haven't really connected to the school the way that an ED1 has. Because you're thinking about it, like ED2, you're reading them kind of the same time you're reading regular decision. Like you'll try to get through ED2 first and then read regular, but you just came off of reading all these ED1 kids that love your school. And so
Sure.
like you're now calibrated to see the connection's not really there. And again, if you start your application in that 2-week period, you're writing all those supplements, then it shows. So
I thought you
I
would
do
take
think
both
that
ends. I thought you would take both ends.
yeah, it's both hands.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. The only other thing I want to say is I did have I'm not going to mention the name of the school, but I did have a conversation with the school with someone who said some years they had a higher ED2 admit rate than ED1. So I just want to say that all of these things are individual and it's not the norm, but we still always have to say every school can be a little different. And we still need to always say that and not just take something as absolute gospel. It's just want to throw that out there. But in general, that's going to be pretty rare. Most schools are going to have a higher ED1 admit rate than ED2. Yeah.
We can have a whole hour conversation on ED.
We
Just by
are.
itself, it's so complicated.
That's why this is only one question. We got many other ED questions, right? Is it worth
Absolutely,
it? And
absolutely.
what if I need money? I mean, all of those are going to be separate videos. I'm a
Yes.
chatterbox, Christina, and I've already exceeded my little time quota on this one. So thank you as always.
All right. Bye-bye.